So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we have another pseudo-siege in this replay particularly because we have MIRLOND, which is a map which has existed in the game for some time, and I have actually played on it a couple of times, but I've never actually covered it myself. I know J-Monster has, but yeah, this is essentially a cityscape map, but it is going to act more like a siege because it is going to be a 4v3, so those who are going to be on the coast here are going to be certainly playing the role of the attackers today, and it's kind of an interesting scenario because it seems like Numenor has sort of cajoled the Southrons and the Easterlings into helping them defend their seaside stronghold, whereas three factions of Orcs and the Dwarves of Erebor are descending on them to try and take it for themselves, so definitely has the feeling of like the rich kids of Numenor and Erebor sort of buying off a few factions to act as muscle for them. So they can fight over this rather interesting settlement here, with of course the blue team acting as the defenders here. The Steward of Dale sent this one to me, who's playing as Harad, and that is actually why I elected to do this replay now, because there has been someone in the comments who's been wanting me to play as Harad, and I have, but I haven't really got a game which I think is of high enough quality with me playing in it to actually use, but I did want to show some Harad anyway, so we're going to be seeing this battle from Harad's perspective. But I think we'll go through the red team first of all, considering they're kind of acting as the attackers and they're sort of more on the coast here. And we shall start off with the ones who are furthest inland, sort of where the sand fades into some green fields and trees, and that is going to be the Witch Realm of Angmar, played by Silver Banshee. Now, Angmar is a very useful asset to have when you're on the attack in a situation like this, because no other Orc faction prioritises brute force as much as Angmar does, and that's a very nice thing to have at your disposal when you're trying to take a defensive position, especially seeing as Angmar, the way that they usually accomplish this is through numbers, so they can obviously absorb a few casualties, and through tough and survivable mid to high tier troops. So a lot of their mid to high tier troops tend to have good armour and nice shields, which makes them difficult to whittle down as quickly as you might like to if you're facing off against them. So we have some Gundabad Guard, which actually do inspire as well, so in addition to the fact that spears are just straight up better in 0.97, the Gundabad Guard also have a bit of extra utility by inspiring the nearby troops around them to stay in the battle for longer, and seeing as they don't have troll drummers, they can't rely on that sort of thing as much as both Mordor and the Misty Mountains can. We also have another very useful tool for Angmar in this sort of situation, considering they could be fighting in the choke points in the streets of MIRLOND itself, and the Blackwatch Legion, of course, can try and push their way through the lines. We've seen that that can fail, though. In 0.97, the last time we saw the Blackwatch Legion try that in a siege, it was on Dale, and they were stopped dead in their tracks by a combination of Khazad-dûm and Arthedain, and it backfired horrendously on Angmar. So it's all about knowing when to push with them. The General's Bodyguard is going to be the Witch Realm Blackguard, which is not terribly surprising because the shields and armour make them a bit of a better choice, I think, in this sort of settlement, especially when they're on the attack, because otherwise they will be focused down. Not that the Hammer Guard are weak or sort of fragile by any means, but the Blackguard just they tend to do that job a little bit better, and obviously as far as sword and board units go, they are one of the finest in the game. Got some Witch Realm Scourge Raiders here among the heather bushes and the trees. Obviously they are one of those units with the what's dubbed the Prec trait, which means they throw a projectile and then charge into melee. And honestly, I think of those units, the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders are the easiest to use. I feel as though, you know, throwing a weapon and then charging in is best with this unit out of all of them that have this trait. They also have the armour upgrade as well, which will make them a little bit tankier, but even so, they are still a little bit vulnerable to enemy skirmishers because they lack a shield, of course, but the armour will at least mitigate some of that damage. The Witchers, so we'll be seeing the green fire yet again. That wasn't enough to win the last battle that we saw Angmar in on Rivendell for them, but we'll see if it's enough to cause a dent in the defenders here. Is that 2 units of Witchers that they've got? I think it might be. Yeah, because those are 2 banner carriers, so he's gone for 2 units of Witchers, which is, I think, maybe a little bit foolhardy because it does make your army much smaller. I'm sure that there's some hidden Snaga around here, but that is a very risky move. It could really pay off, of course, because you could really bombard the enemy with 2 units of Witchers, but it does really cut in to the amount of troops that you can bring, and it's not even as if they've padded their numbers with Angmar Halberds or Marauders either. Some upgraded Witch Realm Pikemen just to have some sort of phalanx on the front line, and then some Walk Riders just to make sure that they aren't harried by cavalry, which I think they might be judging by those shapes on the horizon. The army just behind him, Mordor, played by Grizzly Fox, then is going to need to move forward and support Angmar very quickly, otherwise the smaller nature of Angmar's army, as a result of bringing 2 units of Witches, is going to be a bit of a problem for them. Minas Morgul chosen are upper end spearmen, of course, with very nice armour, good shields as well. Durable, but like most spears of this type, they won't necessarily get killing done particularly quickly unless, of course, cavalry wanders into melee with them. A few units of Moran Guard, very basic Orc Spears, obviously nothing too special, but they are at least a little bit better than the Orc Fodder that they are fighting alongside here. Completely free though, so the Orc Fodder just make up for a bit of spare manpower that Mordor can use as they see fit. As every Orc faction, sans Isengard has access to such a unit. We also have the Temple Guard, the armor-piercing archer, another very deadly ranged unit that the attackers have at their disposal in this battle. We shall see how well they're able to use the armor-piercing projectiles from the Temple Guard, because of course they don't have ammunition troubles like Numenor's do. Very, very good unit, as well as being very good in melee, of course, so good all-round choice, I think, for this sort of situation. Some Orc Archers, as well as some Orc Javelins, so some low-tier skirmishers of both varieties here, which is good, just to put some pressure on the enemy lines. Maybe a little bit more infantry could be required, though. Troll Drummers, just to keep their low-tier units in the fight. We have the Mountain Trolls, of course, which are just going to be not as strong as something like the Olag High, but they will at least still give the defenders something to think about. Some Temple Inquisitors, which are a very nasty unit of melee cavalry, getting a good look at them here with their new masks. And then a couple of units of Black Legion of Barad-dûr and a few units of Orc Maulers, as well as the Nazgûl. So a fairly well-rounded army, although I have a feeling that Mordor will probably need numbers to support Angmar, and I don't know if they brought enough melee infantry, but then again Mordor can't be held accountable for that, really. Then we have BVE-24, who's going to be playing as Isengard. His deployment zone was a little bit weird, so he's on this tiny little spit of land here, and he's got all of his forces here, so he's got Uruk-hai Raiders, Uruk-hai Infantry, Pikes, he's almost certainly got crossbows in there, some Isengard Wargs, Trolls of the White Hand, which are very, very strong trolls, certainly much stronger than the Mountain Trolls, but overall a fairly standard Isengard force this by the looks of things. Lots of Uruk-hai. Isengard, of course, much like Angmar, tend to focus a little bit more so on quality than the Misty Mountains and Mordor do. And then finally, we have another force who have blobbed up into a very interesting formation here. Erebor, played by Resb, who he has got a lot of Ironfoot units, as you would expect from Erebor. Erebor, also, we saw in the last battle, are capable of bringing a lot of elite units, although with a smaller budget than their foes, they will probably have to be a little bit careful of doing that here. Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, as well as some Sons of Durin just in behind them. And some Sons of the Fallen are in there as well. It's a little bit difficult to tell quite what they've got. There's Erebor Legionaries in there as well, I'm sure. I did see some of their masks, but it is kind of difficult to tell. But a lot of Ironfoot units nonetheless. Then we shall move on to the Defenders, and the Defenders are in luck because they are on the right side of the map. Rune, in particular, in this deployment zone, have access to the highest point of the settlement, so they can most certainly dig in should they need to, and they will be able to be immediately reinforced by Numenor. There is a connection between the three of them, so it's not as if one of them's cut off in one portion of the settlement, which would be a bit of a shame. We have Rune, played by Tundra's Fox, and he has got some Gamprim on the front. Obviously, Rune are very much a jack of all trades when it comes to the Evil Men factions. They can do a bit of everything, rather like Arthedain are for the Western Kingdoms. Rune, the main gap they do have is a lack of pikemen, but against the dwarves they probably will be thankful for the fact that they have halberdiers, as well as crossbowmen and also some Narum, which do have a flaming arrow projectile, but it's only cosmetic. It doesn't actually do any additional damage or morale damage. Some Baltroth tribesmen, which are obviously going to be very, very useful as well. Javelins against the dwarves is a must-have, really. Variag mercenaries are in there, obviously a nice versatile archer, I'll call them, because they can act as decent infantry, but against the dwarves it's unlikely they'll be able to really lay down a hurting on dwarven infantry. Flagrim, however, nice lot of AP here. Eastron clansmen fully upgraded just to make them a little bit tankier. There's some camels chosen in there as well as some chariots, so fairly standard for Rune. Like when Rune are up against a more heavily armoured force like the dwarves, they can afford to bring a more standard build of their local units. It's only when they're up against someone like Linden or maybe Mirkwood that they have to rethink their usually quite AP focused armies. Then here in the middle we have Numenor, played by Nubiwan. He has got a lot of Romena about him, which are a very strong unit of line infantry. Probably the strongest on the field. The Erebor Legionaries might have something to say about that, but the Romena about him can be brought in greater quantities before the red limit is reached. Seafarers of Nindamos, a very important unit for Numenor, so they can deal damage with their jabbies. The Romena Nardukadar, which are of course armor-piercing spears. Pharazim Swordmasters are an incredibly powerful unit of infantry as well. We'll see how useful they can be in this situation against the hordes that are approaching them. Belagai Pikemen, the Romena Boabarim as well. So more armor-piercing archers on the field today, this time for the blue team. Some Belagai archers just to presumably try and skirmish with the enemy should that be necessary. They definitely don't want to have their seafarers and their Boabarim sort of coaxed into a fight with enemy skirmishers. More Nardukadar and then more Abarim as well. And also there is another unit way back over here which could be cavalry, I'm not sure. Or there is some hidden shenanigans going on here. This could be some Adunaim shadow bows. No, it's Romena Caribarim. So they are just hidden in what is technically classed as woods, as there is a unit of cavalry here, which could prove to be a bit of a problem for Angmar and Mordor on the approach, because I would assume that they're going to come around the side here, whereas Isengard and Erebor are going to punch right through the city itself. But now we move on to the Steward of Dale, the player who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him playing as Harad. He's got some Haradrim spearmen, very basic units, certainly nothing to write home about in terms of quality, but cheap to field, so they can certainly pad your army out. Harad, in comparison to their two allies today, are certainly much more focused around damage than keeping themselves alive, and their Trollmen units are a good example of this. While they are durable in their own right, they're certainly more focused around how much damage they can do to the enemy more so than keeping themselves alive. They do have a shield at least, which does help them against arrows, but of course very, very nasty in melee armor-piercing damage. Champions of Nafrat are essentially the better version of them, only obviously more expensive, and the General's Bodyguard unit. The Serpent's Fangs, which are a poison arrow unit, very, very nice to use as well. Again, multiple HP, General's Bodyguard unit. Hashari Stalkers, so some nice Haradrim Rangers, as well as the mounted variant, the Hashari Shadow, so very much Harad's damage focus coming into full effect here, as well as a lot of their javelins. I saw the Demons of the Desert, there's also Mahud Beast Hunters. A lot of Mahud units in general here. We've got the Beast Tamers, Southron Archers, and mixed in there we can also see the Serpent Guard, which do act as Harad's line infantry for the most part. They do have the Mahud infantry units as well, although I don't think they've actually brought them today, which are cheaper, sort of more in line with what you'd expect from the Orcs. But the Serpent Guard, very more similar to the other human kingdoms, albeit less focus on armor and shields and more on doing a bit more damage in melee, which certainly has its place. But now I think I will make a little cut, because the red team are quite a fair ways away and they'll have to march through the town and around it, so we'll make a little cut and we'll rejoin when the battle has begun. So the battle is just about beginning, or at least the initial skirmishes are beginning, as the Haradrim Southron Archers start to open up on the initial probing assaults from Isengard here, as BVE-24 sends forward his Uruk-hai crossbowmen to try and pin down these Haradrim men that are on the front line, the Beast Tamers and the Serpent Guard, which is not a half bad idea, because these crossbowmen, the Southron Archers, will take quite a long time to actually kill them properly, and this of course will lead to some pretty nasty casualties on the front line. However, interesting move here for the Mahud Beast Tamers to come forward and to try and send the Uruk-hai crossbowmen running for the hills, and it is worth saying the Beast Tamers were the Haradrim unit that were hidden in the top corner of the map as well, that I forgot to mention in the initial composition. But the Uruk-hai crossbowmen and now the Uruk-hai raiders being engaged by the camels, although this isn't really the ideal situation for the camels, but just to make life a little bit more uncomfortable for the crossbowmen, this is definitely an understandable move. Honestly, if I were Haradia, and he is now doing this, Steward of Dale, is to sort of move his units out of range of the crossbowmen and sort of force the crossbows to come even further forward into the jaws of yet more infantry and javelins, and get them to come a lot closer, so that if they do get into a position where they can shoot, they can easily be charged down in melee. But in order to cover that retreat, the Steward of Dale is throwing one of his units of javelin cavalry under the bus a little bit. These Mahud Beast Tamers are taking horrendous losses from the Uruk-hai crossbowmen. Those crossbows, of course, one of the main reasons why you would want to play as Isengard. They've got a lot of stopping power to them. Definitely a big part of what Isengard as a faction are all about. The Mahud Beast Hunters are here, but they're unlikely to want to use their javelins on Uruk-hai raiders. But this is good from Isengard. He has harried Harad back, and it's unfortunate really that he doesn't have more men here to take more advantage of the gaps that he's making, because he could very well come forward in force now and take advantage of some of the gaps in the line. Having said that, Harad do have a double-layered skirmish defense up here on the cliffs. The Hashari Shadows are in position which, if they come in, they're going to be able to do immense damage with their body-piercing projectiles. The Uruk-hai Raiders are still taking damage on the way forward though, and they are shaken, which is, again, not terribly surprising. They're here on their own, really. They just stopped being shaken there, but the Uruk-hai crossbows are technically in support of them, but they're the only units in melee. They're a very, very entry-level infantry unit as far as Isengard are concerned, so it's not too surprising that they're immediately being shaken in the face of the very scary Haradrim tribesmen. Unit of Beast Tamers coming down here, or Beast Masters I should say, coming down to once again try and charge into the Uruk-hai Raiders to really send them packing. They may very well have used up all their javelins already. No, they don't. Javelin cavalry doesn't tend to have a huge amount of ammunition, and that is for balance purposes, otherwise they would be the be-all and end-all when it comes to cavalry engagements. But definitely these engagements are not really all that important in the grand scheme of things. This battle will really be decided when the attackers start kicking into high gear and attack the defenders on all sides, which, to be fair, they have been quite cautious about that so far, and having played a game already with BVE and Res playing on the same team, I know that they are certainly more inclined to be careful, but I really don't feel as though being careful is what is needed here. As soon as Angmar and Mordor are good to go on the other side, they should just try and crush the defensive position underfoot. They have the strength to do so. The Variag mercenary is already laying down a hurting on the Dwarven miners, which again, you don't want to send your miners forward into this situation because yes, they are the lowest tier unit you have, but they're also one of the very few units in the Erebor roster which can be killed off by basic archers very quickly. So you're going to be hemorrhaging unit models for no good reason here, and it's only Variag mercenaries you're draining the ammunition of. Rune don't really care about the ammo on these guys, because they will be just as useful for them as fodder on the front line as they are poking away at the enemy forces from range. The Uruk-hai Raiders now all quiet on the western front, as it were. What's going on back here? You can see the Temple Inquisitors trying to chase off the Wain Riders of Rune, the runic chariots. The arrows already flying forward. The chariots should be able to get out of here, but the Temple Inquisitors, if they do catch the Wain Riders in melee, should be able to do a ton of damage to them. Chariots don't do very well when they're bogged down, especially not against a unit like this. They're going to try and charge through them, which this will do damage to the Temple Inquisitors, but I can't help but feel as though the runic chariots are the ones that are going to come out of this engagement worse for wear, especially now that the Angmar wargs are also in here. I'll be amazed if they don't lose at least one chariot, and indeed they lost two, I think. No. Yeah, they lost two. Three, even. 3 chariots down. So yeah, that's definitely an engagement which went in favour of the red team there. Chariots are much better at doing that sort of thing against infantry, as long as they manage to avoid pikes. But sort of charging into Temple Inquisitors like that, you may very well kill a few unit models off, but the Temple Inquisitors will take that fight, because the chariots are more expensive, and also potentially they're so dangerous to the attackers here. They're obviously going to try and take them down as quickly as they can. Yeah, and here go the chariots. To be fair, chariots are kind of finicky to use. Like, unless you're quite proficient with them, they can be very difficult to get the most out of. But certainly the Wain Riders of Rune shut down pretty hard here. Meanwhile, another probing assault from the Uruk-hai Raiders, but this is another example of sending forward just a very basic unit of infantry to their deaths, and they're not really going to make any sort of progress. The Harad front line is going to be able to hold them at bay very, very easily. The Beast Tamers here getting their phalanx down, and if need be, you can see actually that already in melee some of the Serpent Guard are poking forward as well, who are far the superior of the Uruk-hai Raiders when it comes to line infantry. The Uruk-hai infantry will be much more of a solid matchup for the Serpent Guard. Very similar kinds of units. The Dwarven Miners are still there out in front, but Isengard definitely trying to take the long game here. And it is interesting because the attackers did allow the defenders to set up and take the exact positions that they needed. If they move forward quickly, like the dwarves actually fell back and hid behind the hill for a little while there, rather than moving forward faster. And honestly, I think the dwarves probably could have taken this central area. It would have been a little bit exposed perhaps, but we'll see. I mean, it could end up being a good move in the end for the attackers. They could go on to win this fight based on their sort of the more cautious start they've made. But I can't help but feel as though there could have been the opportunity here for the attackers to be a little bit more proactive in the early game. Make it so that the defenders were not able to sort of take up the exact positions that they wanted, because now it's going to be very difficult to dislodge them. They've got their skirmishers in position, and at some point the attackers are going to have to move into where the skirmishers are, because they can't really get into a position where they can shoot them. I suppose the dwarves, because Erebor don't really have archers, they could have put a unit there and maybe tried to shoot into the Haradrim javelins, force them to retreat, and then the Isengard infantry moves up. That's the sort of thing you could do. But as it is, I can't help but feel as though they're just going to have to march into the teeth of the defensive skirmishers, and that's going to be really nasty for them. See there, the Beastmasters up on the hill. There's only 8 of them remaining, so they definitely paid the price for their brave sally forth into the Isengard lines. And they're trying to sort of just throw their javelins down, kill off the odd man that they can, killing off the Uruk-hai crossbowmen as best they are able. And the Uruk-hai crossbows, to give them their credit, they have managed to kill off quite a few of the Haradrim infantry line here. The Beast Tamers and the Serpent Guard have definitely not escaped unscathed, and very few of those kills would have been because of the Uruk-hai Raiders. Almost all of them will have been because of the crossbow support that they had. There go the Uruk-hai Raiders routing another unit of Uruk-hai Raiders coming in, so one by one come the Isengard infantry. And usually I'm not the biggest fan of those kind of tactics, because you're really feeding kills into the defensive infantry line if you do that. If he manages to get enough kills with his crossbows to justify it, then fair enough, but if he doesn't, that will be on him. Meanwhile, the dwarves are certainly not eager to move forward, are they? Dwarves are certainly waiting and biding their time, and you can see why attackers don't move in this sort of situation, but you're really just prolonging the inevitable. Like, you're going to have to move in on this defensive position eventually, and it's just a question of whether or not they're waiting for Mordor and Angmar to get into position so they can start assaulting the rear end of the settlement. Because one thing that is worth mentioning here is there are two ways in around this rather large structure here in the middle, the sort of faux Hagia Sophia. But there are a lot of skirmishes that the defenders have, and yes, they're in nasty positions, and yes, that's going to be hard to deal with. But on the other hand, the fact they've got a lot of skirmishes means that they have skimped a little bit more on their infantry than perhaps they should have. That is your opportunity as the attackers to be super aggressive and try and smash their infantry lines to pieces, because their skirmishes will be absolutely no good to them if you wear down their infantry so fast that they can't really get many volleys off. You see here the Uruk-hai Raiders, they're trying to sort of push through, but a single unit of Uruk-hai Raiders is not going to be able to push through a phalanx backed up by a unit of line infantry. Maybe a unit of spears and shield wall could do that, but not line infantry, especially not light line infantry like the Uruk-hai Raiders. There's also trollmen in close proximity, which Dale, the steward of Dale, playing as Harad, may very well be bringing down these trollmen to get them into melee as quickly as he possibly can. There's the Southron archers. Not body-piercing projectiles, but they're still finding their mark, and that will still be enough to worry the Uruk-hai Raiders on the front line. They have managed to sort of wrap around this line a little bit, but yeah, these very basic Uruk-hai are not going to be lasting too much longer on the front line, you would imagine. The trollmen certainly going to be able to rip them to pieces. The crossbows are going to find it a little bit more difficult as well. And now, because the dwarves are effectively just allowing Rune free reign over here, the Loka-Nar Rim are going to be able to start shooting their flaming arrows into the Uruk-hai crossbows that are set up here. And again, it won't kill off these crossbows terribly quickly. The Uruk-hai crossbows have got decent enough armour, but it will force them to retreat. So now Isengard will not be able to utilise their crossbows in support of their infantry anymore. And this actually looks more like 2 units of Uruk-hai Raiders, indeed it is. So a little bit more of a substantial force than was here previously, but against the superior quality of the Haradrim on this line, it's still not really going to net them too much in the way of results. Well, we've got over here the Orc Archers moving forward, immediately however being chased down by the Mahud Beastmasters, who actually use their javelins on them, which is a little bit of a waste. I feel as though Harad, the way they've used their Beastmasters, they're probably wishing that they brought their Serpent Guard in this fight, because they would have been much better at the role that the Beastmasters have been trying to fill. But perhaps he was thinking he was going to hide his Beastmasters up in the corner of the map and then go after the Wargs and the Temple Inquisitors later. But it hasn't really worked out that way. As it is though, we do now have a bit more of a committal here from Angmar and Mordor getting towards the enemy position. And these are wider choke points as well, but having said that, it's still going to be a pretty nasty defensive position to try and take on. And of course the beauty about having Southron archers, just a unit of basic archers over here, means that they will be able to have some returning salvos onto the attackers as they move forward. Because obviously they don't want to use their Boabarim to shoot into Orc Javelins and Orc Archers if they can help it. But once again, it's going to be the Haradrim lines which are going to be tested initially here. A combination of the Beast Tamers and the Dismounted Serpent Guard once again making up the initial lines. But yeah, Mordor needs to support their skirmishers a little bit better than this, to be honest with you, because they're going to break on contact. And Harad will just be tempted to be aggressive and counter-attack if they just send them forward on their lonesome. Meanwhile, I'm surprised the Uruk-hai Raiders are still in melee, honestly. Just the fact that they're in an engagement with the Trollmen of Harad, I would have thought would have been enough to send them routing pretty quickly. But as it is, they've managed to hold themselves together morale-wise a little bit better than I was expecting, but the unit themselves has been, well, they've just routed, but the unit themselves had certainly taken an awful lot of damage. The Uruk-hai crossbows are back in position. The Loka-Nar Rim were forced to retreat because the Dwarven miners and some Ironfoots were coming forward to put some pressure on them. Uruk-hai infantry are now moving forward as well, so again, it's sort of like a conveyor belt of units that Isengard are pushing in, but I just don't feel as though this is the right way to go about things. I feel as though trying to smash through these defences with much more significant forces of infantry would be the right way to go. As it is, this is the way that Isengard are choosing to do it. It might very well, bear fruit in the end, because Harad, not necessarily the faction that does well over a long engagement because of their lower defensive values, but we shall see. There's always the opportunity for Numenor and Rune to conserve their manpower for later. Let Harad take most of the damage on the chin earlier, and then allow their more elite units to clean up. Forward come the Barrow Wights, another unit that was hidden at the start, but the Barrow Wights, of course, nowhere near the unit they used to be at the last patch. They were ridiculous in the last patch, really. They made life for Angmar in sieges, whether offensive or defensive, very, very easy. But now that is not the case. They still fill the same role. They will still last a long time in melee on the front line, but nowhere near as long as they used to. Big differences. So certainly a much more reasonable unit now. The Numenor front line is still just waiting over here, so they're electing to go after the Harad front line, which is very understandable because Numenor's infantry is extremely scary in that sort of situation, with Ravenna about him backing up the Belagire pikes. Meanwhile, so some Dwarven units are actually coming to the aid of Isengard over here, singling out this particular choke point perhaps as the one that they want to attack. But yeah, even the Uruk-hai infantry, because the Trollmen are on the front line, Uruk-hai infantry are exactly the sort of thing that Trollmen are going to like to fight. You know, their armor piercing is going to carve right through the Uruk-hai plate. And obviously they're also being backed up by what's left of the Beast Tamers and the Serpent Guard that have been here for quite a while. The Beast Hunters are also going to try and throw their javelins at what, I wonder? A lot of their javelins are hitting the cliffside, but able to kill off quite a few of the crossbows, get a few glancing blows on the Ironfoot warriors as well. More arrows coming in here. But honestly, just the fact that these projectiles are having a difficult time actually getting over the cliffside is all the excuse I would need to commit forward a ton of my units and try and smash through this defensive position quickly. And that's all the excuse that any of the attackers should need, really. Because that would be a real problem for the defenders if the attackers caught onto that. Because one of the main things that you have to take advantage of as the defenders in this situation is your skirmishers. Because all of the defensive armies have invested quite heavily in them. And if they can't use them to their fullest effect, it could be pretty ugly for them. But now we've got Ravenna about him backing up the Trollmen as well, so once again the defenders are committing forward a unit of higher quality than the attackers to this particular engagement. The Ironfoot warriors by no means are a weak unit, but in comparison to the units they're having to face down on this front line, things aren't looking too rosy for the attackers so far. As still the grind continues. Balchoth tribesmen coming over here, so I think Rune, you know, seeing obviously this bridge connecting the two defensive points, seeing the fact that the dwarves are all too content to just sort of sit back and wait and play the long game, he's free to send reinforcements over to help his ally over here. So the defenders definitely being afforded a good deal of room to support one another, which is always good if you're the defenders, but if you can prevent that as the attackers, you really want to try and do so. Meanwhile, Orc Javelins getting close to the Haradrim line, and here you can see Nar Rim, so yeah, again, Rune coming over here to assist their Southron brethren, and the Orc Javelins immediately taking quite a lot of damage there as they turn their backs to the Nar Rim, the limited shield value that they have being completely negated. There's also the fodder, so fodder and javelins moving forward is extremely unlikely to make any sort of impact onto the Harad lines, and indeed Harad see the opportunity here. The fodder and the javelins are there for the taking, and a combination of Southron archers that are out of ammunition, which are not great in melee of course, but the dismounted Serpent Guard, the two units together are going to be able to rip their way through Orc fodder, which will deprive Mordor of yet more of their numbers. The Beast Tamers also joining in on the front line. The Orc Javelins are going to be able to get out of there, but this is going to be a free unit of Orc fodder that Harad are going to be able to chase off, so yet more of the valuable manpower the attackers have at their disposal is going to be isolated and dealt with. Never a good sign when you see that happening to you as the attackers. Ravenna and Ardukadara over here. The Belagire pikes. We've got here Belagire archers. So Numenor still just biding their time. What have we here? I mean, to give them their credit, the Ironfoot warriors and the Uruk-hai infantry are still fighting hard on the front line, but still, with the Trollmen, with the Phalanx, the Ravenna about him, they aren't going to make any sort of headway in this engagement. There's more Ironfoot warriors there that could be committed. They could be committed now, though, and there wouldn't be a difference. The Flak Rim are waiting as well, so that's AP, more AP that can be committed to the front line. The crossbows have taken damage. You can see here there's only 69 of them remaining, 48 of the other unit. So while they managed to get a few good volleys off, they have paid for that pretty dearly. And the rest of Isengard's army, like, slowly but surely Isengard's manpower is going to start to dissipate if this is how the battle continues to go. The other unit of Ironfoot warriors now adding themselves to the front line to try and add some more pressure. The 7 Uruk-hai raiders that are broken and fighting to the death there. Very nice shot into the back though. The Beast Hunters up on top of the hill now have a much better shot, which is going to be really bad news for the Isengard and Erebor infantry, which is trying to force its way up this hill. There's also the Balchoth tribesmen there as well, ready to use their javelins should needs must. Little archery range there. We'll see up here the Shari Stalkers waiting, so it is a very nice defensive position that the defenders have set up. But this is absolutely not the way the attackers should be approaching this. Of course, this battle can turn around very quickly with units like the Witches on the field, and also just the fact the attackers have got much more disposable manpower than the defenders does, of course, mean this battle can easily turn. You can see here that the Orc Maulers are also on the front line now as well, but they're not going to make any sort of impact either. The AP is not really terribly useful against Harad, if we're being honest. There is a little bit of support coming in from the Orc Javelins though, which is good to see. Trying to pick away at that Haradrim line. But yeah, a single unit of Orc Maulers being committed to this death trap is certainly not the way to go. Forward come the Minas Morgul Chosen and the Gundamad Guard. This is a little bit more like it actually. Combined force of spearmen from Mordor and Witch Realm of Angmar. They may only be spears, but they're all pretty decent spears. Spears that also inspire morale, and also there's also the Barrow-wights coming in. With the support of the Orc Javelins, this is a little bit more like it. This will, of course, probably poke the defenders into using yet more of their skirmishers on them. But now is the time. I mean, with their spears and shield wall, they could push through this and really start to chew away at this front line. Yet more javelins coming in from the Orc Javelins. Yeah, here we go. This is what I'm talking about. Angmar getting it now. Barrow-wights, Minas Morgul Chosen also doing the same thing. So this means that this front line will now be surrounded and utterly destroyed. And considering it was mostly Southrons and Mahoots, they'll also break very, very quickly, especially with the Barrow-wights nearby, a fear-causing unit. Numenor are coming down, but it's Boabarim who are out of ammunition, so they must have used their ammo earlier. I did notice the Temple Inquisitors, and actually the Troll Drummers are dead back there. So that must have been as a result of the Boabarim, because I can notice the Numenor hidden cavalry has not yet revealed itself, but the Boabarim now are also just being surrounded as well. There you can see the Seafarers of Nindamos doing a really grievous amount of damage there to the Gundabad Guard, but this is worth it for the attackers. They've made up a lot of ground and they're also doing a lot of damage to the enemy positions. The Minas Morgul Chosen need to keep their bottle here. They need to stay on the front line. They're going to take losses doing this, but they're doing a lot of damage to the enemy and they need to keep up the pressure at this point. Ramen and Nardukadar coming in to try and help shore up the line as well. Ramen and Abarim have managed to engage a unit of depleted Gundabad Guard. More reinforcements are needed. Orc Javelins being committed to melee. Orc Maulers are coming forward. The Warg Riders could honestly try and get in and around just to sort of try and muck up the defensive position a bit here, because the cavalry is probably not going to be terribly useful. I mean, they don't know that the Ramena Karibarim are back there. There's also the Adunaim Shadow Bow, so some Mordor Rangers coming forward as well. So this is a little bit more like it, a little bit more proactive from the attackers. They need to make sure that this momentum keeps up, because if they slow down here, the Numenor forces will be able to reorganise and then just beat them back. Here come the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. They're going to be getting a new unit model, I think, in the hotfix as well, which is nice. Yeah, and here, the Orc Maulers are sort of trying to get out of there, but I'm not sure. Are they routing? 26 of them. Yeah, the Orc Archers are routing as well. I don't know. I feel as though the reinforcements weren't on hand quickly enough, because the attackers had the opportunity there. The door for a little while was open. But now, with all of these Numenorian infantry units on the front line, the Trollmen also adding themselves, it looks as though that door has been slammed firmly shut. Meanwhile, this front line has not really moved at all. It's sort of been a mutually destructive slaughter. But again, I feel as though the defenders have probably had the better of this engagement as well. The Dwarven infantry, and when the Uruk-hai infantry came to the front line as well, they did better than the Raiders at the very least, but it's still very difficult. We're actually more or less at the halfway point of the battle now, and you can see here that, technically speaking, 15 to 30. They've lost double the amount the defenders have, the attackers, but very low percentage of the kills here for the halfway point, so that leads me to believe that eventually here the red team are going to throw caution to the wind and come forward with all of their might. Which is honestly what they should do at this point, because they're hemorrhaging manpower. And they may very well still lose, even if they come forward with all their force. But it's their best chance, I think. If approaching the battle in the way they have here, then defeat is the only thing that awaits them. You can see here that the combined force of the Trollmen and all of that really elite Numenorian infantry on the front line has just halted the progress of the Mordor force. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr, another unit which is very good at pushing through enemy lines, but they're stuck here, and in prolonged melee, just in a straight up melee fight, they're not the best. Great Shield infantry is not really the best at actually fighting other units. Here come the Scourge Raiders, getting ready to throw their axes, and they are going to throw them into the Remena Abarim. A lot of good hits there, a lot of very nasty hits, several of them falling away. And the Scourge Raiders are now going to move in as well. Coming into melee, they're immediately being shot up though, so again arrows flying back and forth, and once again I feel as though the attackers are on the wrong end of this engagement from their perspective. Let's go and see what's happening over here. Are the dwarves moving forward? Kind of. They're thinking about it. Maybe they can be coaxed into a fight on this side at some point. The Dwarven Miners are going to come in, but again they're going to make the same mistake on this side as they did on the other side of the river with Isengard. They're going to commit forward their weakest units first, and the weakest units are just going to get slaughtered en masse by the Runic front line. I mean, yes, the Eastron Clansmen are just a low tier infantry unit, much like the Dwarven Miners, but they have 2 levels of armour upgrades to help them, and also the backup of the Gamprim is the significant thing here. The Halberds are going to come down, and the Miners are just going to get slaughtered. So we do have an engagement between Erebor and Rune on this side of the river finally, but it's again going to go fairly comfortably in favour of Rune, you would imagine, based on how this has started. They are going to get reinforcements in a little bit more quickly at the very least. Some Ironfoot warriors. But still, with the reinforcements that Rune has, unless Erebor comes forward with all of their strength, if they can make this just an all-out brawl, then Erebor should win. Their infantry overall is of higher quality than Rune's, and even the Halberdiers, which would be a very useful tool for Rune to have, Erebor have got Ironfoot pikes on the field today. But if Erebor just filter into Rune like this, they'll be playing into Tundra's Fox's hands, and the Easterlings will be absolutely ecstatic that that's how they've decided to try and handle the situation. Southron Archers and Mahud Beast Hunters now being sent forward to try and hold the front line. Again, the Mahud Beast Hunters are actually AP in melee with those little clubs that they wield. The Southron Archers are of course terrible in melee, so the Uruk-hai Infantry and the Ironfoot Warriors will actually win this fight, I think, now. But with the close proximity of the flag rim as soon as they move forward, the fight will once again turn in favour of the defenders, you would imagine, as soon as they realise what's happening over there. It obviously can be difficult to keep track of everything though, and Harad are also having to fight over here, with their Trollmen on the front line, facing off against the Barrow-wights. Javelins being poured in as well, once again, the Orc Javelins. Maybe not the highest quality of ammunition that they use, but it's still armour-piercing. And that is going to be sorely needed for the attackers here, as the Minas Morgul Chosen, the Barrow-wights and the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders try to make something happen on the front line here. But still, the Remena Abarim, Nardukadar and the Savage Trollman doing the business. Orc Archers coming in just to try and add a little bit more pressure, but they're going to rout very quickly, I would imagine, especially in the face of the Trollman. It's not looking good over here. I mean, to be fair, the defenders don't have too much in the way of manpower left over here. But even still, here come the Blackguard. The Warg Riders are now going to try and get in behind the enemy. Still, the cavalry has not yet revealed itself. Yeah, you can see over here at this point that the attackers are starting to run low on manpower. Here come the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, immediately taking damage from the Adunaim Shadow Bows. The shields, to be fair, will actually mitigate a lot of that damage. They have a huge shield value, as you'd expect. So from the front, even rangers won't actually do that much damage to them. As soon as that transitions into being from the rear, that will change completely though, and they'll start to get melted. The Warg Riders in behind enemy lines, but there's going to be a limited amount as to what they can accomplish here. The Numenorian skirmishers will be able to withstand them in melee. Arrows coming down from on high, of course, another thing that Wargs don't like. And also Remena Nardukadar here on the line. They're going to try and recharge them, but it's not going to go too well. So at this point, where be the Witchers? Moran on guard getting absolutely shredded here. Temple Guard are moving forward. There's the Adunaim Shadow Bows of Mordor to offset the ones from Numenor. Meanwhile, here we go. We can see on this front line that a lot of the Runic front line has died, which is why imagine what Erebor could accomplish if they sent forward their full force here. because the Eastron clansmen are just not well suited to fight against this dwarven infantry, really. I can see one of them just stabbed one of the dwarves there as if to prove me wrong on that point, but certainly the Eastron clansmen don't match up well to dwarven heavy infantry. The Gamp Brim are a good choice, of course, but even with them, the force of the dwarves coming forward, once the momentum is on their side, they'd be very difficult to stop. There's some Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen over there. But there's yet another layer of them, of halberdiers. The Flagrim are also here. The Balchoth tribesmen are shooting point blank. Arrows, well, those are crossbow bolts actually, even worse for the dwarves. Erebor being given a taste of their own medicine with those crossbows there. Interesting over here though, that those Flagrim were not committed forward, so maybe a little bit of a mistake there. Those Flagrim, if they committed themselves alongside the Beast Hunters and the Southron Archers, they probably would have won that fight. As it is, some free kills for the Ironfoot Warriors and the Uruk-hai Infantry, which were sorely needed for the attackers, it must be said. More Isengard forces coming forward. This is Isengard's moment, honestly. Like, look at how open this section is. There's just 2 javelins. Yes, there's the Hishari Shadows, but you can force your way through a unit of Loke Flagrim very, very quickly. And then your allies will be very grateful for the fact that they'll be seeing Isengard and maybe a bit of the dwarves as well coming over here. Because as it is, Angmar and Mordor are getting heavily focused down. Harad have sent forward a lot of their resources over here because Isengard was simply taking too long. And now you can see also the Remena Karibarim have revealed themselves. The Beast Masters are over here, but they were routed by the Temple Inquisitors. Witchround Blackguard are fighting something. The Witches are there. The Númenórean cavalry roaming around. More reinforcements have been committed to the front line, including the Blackwatch Legion. And again, like, victory could be the attackers here on this front now, just because they're running out of manpower a little bit. Which is why if Isengard and the dwarves move forward aggressively now, this could be their fight. The attackers could turn this around, but this is bad news. One of the units of Witches is going to get charged by the Remena Karibarim, and that will be absolutely devastating. All of them pretty much dying in that charge. In fact, I think all of them were. Absolutely skewered. A lance to the heart for Angmar as a player there, because the Remena Karibarim, like, they were left out, and very good battlefield awareness there from Newbie 1, realising the Witches were getting close to the front line and destroying them with the Karibarim. And as if that wasn't enough, they're now going to be able to do the same to the Rangers. So this unit, almost completely defenceless at this point, the backlines of Mordor and Angmar, and the Númenórean cavalry is going to be able to do a ton of damage. And now a rear charge into the infantry as well. Absolutely devastating use of the Karibarim here. And it looked actually like the attackers were starting to make their presence felt in terms of their numbers. But that has immediately been turned back on its head by the Karibarim. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that, look at these trolls that went out over here. They were chasing off the camels. The camels were already broken. And the Temple Inquisitors left their post. And it allowed the Karibarim to just get absolutely devastating blows off on the attackers. And you would imagine that this is probably going to be terminal for Angmar and Mordor. Angmar and Mordor could still do a decent amount of damage here to their quarry, but we shall see. A charge into the Temple Guard. To be fair, the Temple Guard actually mitigated that charge brilliantly because they're a very strong unit in melee as well. I'd probably try and kill off the Rangers if I were him, or the Witches. I mean, I think the Witches have actually been placed in the centre of those pikes there, which is a good move because the other unit of Witches was hideously killed. I did notice the Blackguard there, getting into position. More of the Númenóreans coming over here to help shore up that line. Are Isengard moving in force now? Kind of. Again, like, those pikemen are going the wrong bloody way. Hishari Stalker's getting into melee after, you know, really doing a lot of damage to Angmar and Mordor on the other side. The Trolls of the White Hand have been committed forward, but why are the Uruk-hai pikes not following them? The Trolls have got such a limited support. To be fair, the Trolls will probably still do enough damage to get them through this choke point, but they could crush it underfoot with more support. Far too passive. And again, I am sort of moving away from being heavily critical, but this is not the way to do it. It's just not. You've got to grab a hold of your balls and move in sometimes. You need to be aggressive sometimes, and certainly I feel as though the Isengard and Erebor player, based on what I've seen of them, are both far too passive, and 0.97 does not reward passivity usually. You can get away with it in a free-for-all because you can just sort of sit back and let the enemy teams do the damage to one another, and then you can just come in and clean up. But if it comes down to a straight fight like this, it does not work. Very, very rarely will that work. You need to be more proactive. You need to be the one to do something to the enemy. You can't just think that they're going to collapse of their own volition. It's not a game where you stand and shoot anymore, and I'm very pleased of that. The Mahout Beast Hunters are here. They're close. What are they going to shoot at, though? They're going to go for the trolls? They are. Javelin's connecting, but, you know, killing trolls like this off quickly is difficult to do. They're going to charge into melee now. Hashari Shadows loosing a few volleys into the Uruk-hai Berserkers. The perfect target for a unit of Rangers, to be honest with you. As soon as their hit points are gone, the Berserkers will start to melt. Very, very nice indeed. Meanwhile, over here, Belagaya Footmen, Ramen and Nardukadar still holding the line. Here are the Temple Guard. What's going on back there? The Temple Inquisitors chasing off the Karibarim, who have taken losses of their own, but devastating use of the Numenorian cavalry there. Very, very nicely done. Witch Realm Pikemen and Blackguard, rather, and the Witches of Angmar. Some Blackwatch Legion also returning. Angmar sort of consolidating what's left of their army, but they're not going to be able to force their way through here at the moment. The Barrow-wights are doing their best, but Numenor and runes still stand in the way. And still, for the attackers, there is no way into the settlement itself. Very, very nicely done. Ravenna Abarim marching over, more reinforcements, Belagaya archers. Still that phalanx is over here, only moving through one choke point as well. The attackers not trying to attack both. Kamul's Shadow Guard moving over here to try and help out against the Isengard advance. The Uruk-hai Berserkers still taking a ton of damage. The Hashari Shadows are going to get right up next to them and shoot right through them. And there's no pikemen nearby. Like, all of those forces in reserve, I'm just going to stop talking about it because I've already mentioned how it's not good. But now the Berserkers, single units able to be focused down. And the Hashari Shadow is going to be able to back out of there. Mahout Beast Hunters and Flagrim fighting side by side on the front line. The Trolls of the White Hand, at this point, because of the very limited support they had, have been worn down. If you send in Trolls without enough support, they can be focused down because there's only a few of them. If they have support, they are incredibly difficult to stop. If they don't, that's what happens. And the Berserkers are also going to suffer a very similar fate here, as the Hashari Shadows, probably out of ammunition after their heroics, are going to try and charge in and break the Berserkers, although I don't think Berserkers can be broken. Meanwhile, the Dwarves are trying to force their way through Rune. They're having some success, to be fair, because Rune have siphoned off a huge amount of their resources to other parts of the battlefield because the Dwarves have been so slow. Rune haven't needed to put up a huge force of defence over here. Dragon's Wrath Crossmen trying to do their thing. More crossbow bolts coming in here, carving through the Ironfoot units on the front line and routing them. Forward come the Carmel's Chosen as well, just as if to say to Erebor, look, if you want to get through here, you're going to have to do better than that. Axe throwers shooting into the front, but they're not AP, and the shields will help out, of course, and then more crossbow bolts, and they're just going to be engaged in melee anyway. Pounced upon and destroyed. Meanwhile, Ravenna Karibarim moving in here. Mountain Trolls coming forward. Adunaim Shadow Bows getting into a point-blank range. Some Gamp Brimmer here. Here come the Mountain Trolls to try and help out on the front line. But certainly this fight, again, is going in favour of the defenders. With the Gamp Brim here, the Hashari Shadows also charging in, trying to do what damage they can. There's Nazgul on the front line, to be fair, for Mordor as well, which are difficult to kill off. I just don't think the attackers are going to have enough. The story of this battle has just been the attackers filtering into the defenders, and the defenders gratefully accepting the kills that they've been gifted. Oh, excuse me. Narim killing off those Adunaim Shadow Bows. The Adunaim Shadow Bows, actually, for Rangers, have got a very nice armour value, to be fair, but the Narim have got such a perfect shot on them that that isn't really going to help them out too much. And as if that wasn't enough, the Ravenna Karibarim once again finding the gap. Charging into them, spears down, and killing them off. Here are the Witches. I mean, they're in a firing ready position, but they don't really have the best angle, nor do they have the best target, to be brutally honest. And also, if they move in over here, some of the Narim are actually already shooting at them. So Tundra's Fox is very aware of their presence, and indeed, the Narim are going to try and focus them down. The Pikes, meanwhile, are being focused down by the Belagaya archers, so Angmar and Mordor's torrid time here in the northern end of the settlement continues. And over here, Flagrim reinforcing the front line, and Isengard trickling in their men. They're being punished for it brutally once again. The crossbows are at point blank range, which is all well and good, but the Uruk-hai pikemen are being overwhelmed by Flagrim and beast hunters. Meanwhile, the dwarves coming forward with a bit more numbers now, but still those Eastron crossbowmen in a very nasty position. And now the Carmel Shadow Guard have returned to the runic position, and the additional AP will be very welcome on the front line by the Easterlings. And this is going to be difficult once again as the dwarves move forward. The Ironfoot unit's often so good. I think I can see some of the shields from the Erebor Legionaries. Indeed I can. A very strong infantry unit themselves. The Carmel's Chosen are moving forward. The Dragon's Wrath crossmen are going to try and take up their position on the hill once again. I think to try and shoot into the side here of the Dwarven forces and maybe try and rout them. The Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen tend to have a really horrendous effect on enemy morale. A lot of AP on the front line, the Carmel's Chosen. I mean, it's going to be difficult to hack their way through all these dwarves. The dwarves, I think, still have a good amount of reserves as well. Indeed they do, but you know, elsewhere on the battlefield things are just going badly for the attackers. Some Variag mercenaries here. Forward come the pikemen again, but still the pikes that are already on the front line still taking a lot of damage from the Flagrim. Baltroth tribesmen doing their thing. And I think over here is going to be the problem, because as soon as victory is secured, the Pharazim Swordmasters are going to do the business on the mountain trolls. The Nar-Rim have committed themselves to the front line as well, just to try and help shore things up, as well as the Harajim Spearmen. So maybe things are a little bit more desperate over here than I gave it credit for, if they're committing forward such units to try and continue to hold the line. And to be fair, despite Mordor and Angmar being hammered continuously in this fight, they're still standing, and they're still posing a threat in this fight, so they deserve a lot of credit for that. The Ashari Shadows, though, trying to charge into the Witchers. Partial success, but they follow through into the Witch Realm Pikemen, which had the kind of effect you would imagine it would have. Balagai Archers are there. 2 units of Balagai Archers up on the hill. Not necessarily the most damaging archer, but shooting into the back of this assault is probably going to be all that is required to finally finish Mordor and Angmar. That one mountain troll is still following the Nar-Rim, hounding him.
Only half the enemy force remains. You must pray they lose their will to fight.
More javelins coming in here, trying to do some damage to the Nazkai. See, this is more like it. Isengard are finally coming forward with all their force. They should have done this far sooner. If they'd done this when they committed their trolls, they would already be through here, and they'd honestly probably be saving Mordor and Angmar and winning the game for the attackers. If they go on to lose, that's honestly the moment I would pinpoint as why they lost. The dwarves are also guilty of sitting back a little bit more as well. The Ironfoot axe throwers trying to do their thing, but the Carmel Shadow Guard are going to charge into them and smash them into oblivion. And again, you can see here the damage to this dwarven assault is going to be terminal once again, which means they're going to have to commit forward more. Again, they're guilty of exactly the same thing. If they committed forward more men in that assault, they probably would have won. As it is, they haven't. And yet more valuable manpower is going down the drain. Ironfoot pikemen are coming forward. Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen. They definitely don't have the angle to shoot from there. Another unit of Eastron crossmen up there. Some Variag mercenaries. So Rune's still holding a pretty decent formation here. What's this unit up here? That's the Serpent's Fangs, Haraj's general, so he's probably going to help out Rune against the dwarves. You can see all of these infantry units over here, including the champions of Nafarat, more dismounted Serpent Guard. This phalanx is still in position to prevent any sort of flanking. It's surely only a matter of time at this point. Balagai archers firing point blank. There go the Witchers. We do get to see the green streaks of death at least once in this fight, but unfortunately for Angmar, only one of them is really left alive, and also they're firing at Balagai archers, which is certainly not the most worthy prize for a unit of Witchers. As much damage as that one dude is doing to this unit, it is ultimately going to be, they would have preferred a much juicier target, I'm sure. And now with the Witchers gone, the Balagai archers are going to be free to shoot into what remains of the Angmar force and Mordor force, which is obviously not all that much. Some routing Harajim spearmen. Pharazim swordmasters peeling off. They're going to regroup. I think they're going to go to where Rune initially deployed to regroup their forces. Because to be fair, Isengard have finally managed to smash through this one choke point here. earth was that? Bit of a frame drop there, which leads me to believe something shot. The flag room are shaken. Probably going to act as a bit of a rear guard here as Isengard slowly shuffle their way forwards. Over here, meanwhile, one of the dwarves going to do. So yeah, at this point you can see that what Rune are going to do is they're going to pull back. Because their work is most certainly done on the front lines. A lot of dead golden boys there, but the dwarves ultimately have just not managed to push their way through with any sort of urgency. There's still the Dragon Slayers around here somewhere, which are a very dangerous infantry unit, of course. The Sons of Durin, also very dangerous, but they're not going to win this on the strength of their elites this time, Erebor, because the Champions of Nathrat still live, Serpent Fangs are still at full health, Pharazim Swordmasters still live. It's all very, very nasty units. Carmel's Chosen still live. The Nazkai are here. What was that? Ah. Now this is interesting. A lot of those projectiles unfortunately getting buried into the hillside, which is a real break for the attackers. Yeah, that was a blank fire as well, I think. If the Demons of the Desert can do tons of damage here to the Nazkai and Isengard in general, that really will be game over. Because the attackers simply won't have the manpower to force their way forwards. Okay, the Pharazim Swordmass actually turned around, I think, seeing that Angmar wasn't going to go down without more of a fight. You can see here the Balagyr archers overwhelming what's left of the Blackguard and the Pikes. Similar story over here for the Temple Guard, just one of them left against our Pharazon and the boys. I love the look of the Pharazim Swordmasters and the Nobles. I love that unit model. What's going on over here then? Yep, so the Pikes, the Phalanx that was guarding the other choke point. Oh, excuse me. Hay fever. So that's probably Mordor or Angmar. But yeah, that Phalanx that was guarding this choke point over here is going to retreat to assist his allies. Demons of the Desert still just sort of shuffling themselves around. Isengard advancing across the river. I think if I were Isengard and Erebor at this point, I would kind of realise the sort of situation that I was in and realise that victory was somewhat beyond me. Balagyr archers killing off the Mordor general. That was probably Nazgul as well, so that's not half bad. Variag mercenaries showering arrows down onto the Uruk-hai crossmen as they advance across the bridge. Very nicely done. The Ironfoot axe throwers trying to do their best as well, but the shields and the upgraded armour of the Variag mercenaries will help them survive against those axe throwers pretty well, actually. Very nice and efficient unit, this, the Variag mercenaries. I can see that what looks to be black rain is falling down upon the Uruk-hai crossbows, which means that these guys are firing. The Serpent's Fangs. Nice to see that. More Isengard forces across the river, and again the dwarves, I'm just going to say it outright, cowering once again. It's been a real theme in this battle as to what the dwarves have been doing. They've been hiding behind the cliffs. It's very unbecoming of the dwarves, I must say. Not a lot of bold moves being made. Very meek indeed. Over here, meanwhile, we do have the Demons of the Desert, which, as far as a tool in the late game goes, the attackers really have nothing left to respond to that with. What have I got over here? There's still some Nazgul left alive, but it doesn't really matter too much because the Pharazim Swordmasters are here, and they will be able to kill them off, albeit the Balagyr archers are kind of in the way because they're the ones that are engaging the unit models that still live. But Mordor's still hanging on by the smallest thread. Still in the battle. And we are now well within the final 10,000 frames, and it does look as though finally Isengard and Erebor are going to throw caution to the wind. Far too late, of course. Serpent's Fangs up on the hill as well, using their poison arrows to their advantage. Balagyr pikemen over here guarding this particular choke point, alongside dismounted Serpent Guard. Sons of Durin leading the way in the vanguard. Carmel's Chosen moving to meet them. And the Serpent's Fangs. Arrows finding their mark. I don't think the morale malice the poison arrows apply will be too bad for the Sons of Durin. They will stand and fight to the bitter end. Erebor legionaries also moving in. More projectiles flying into the body of the attackers. ultimately, in spite of the fact that I have been quite critical of the attackers here, it was still an interesting fight to behold. And it is pretty much the ideal example of why you don't want to just filter units one by one into defensive positions, because nothing good will come of it. Wave-based attacks do work, but you need to have waves of a more substantial size than that. No, it's the equivalent of if you go to the beach and you see those very small little waves. They're not going to be enough to knock you over. Whereas if you go there during a storm and you see the large waves that surfers like, they're going to be enough to knock you down. That's exactly what you want. More substantial waves. And the most frustrating thing is, Isengard and Erebor are definitely two factions which are very capable of engaging in that kind of warfare very successfully. And considering that the defenders went more skirmisher heavy, they were also a little bit more vulnerable to that sort of thing. And I feel as though the fact that this is still a relatively close fight, all things considered, and the fact that Mordor and Angmar were really put to the sword, I mean, I certainly don't blame Mordor and Angmar for losing on their side, because I do feel as though Angmar going for the composition they did with 2 units of Witches was a little bit too much. And they were always going to be in trouble from there. And now they're going to get surrounded. Champions of Nafarat coming in, Uruk-hai crossbowmen. Here come the Demons of the Desert. I don't think they're even going to bother to use their ammunition, actually, which is a shame, because the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin will cut them down to size in melee. Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, of course, one of the scarier units of infantry. The Erebor equivalent to the Mithril Guard. Gives you an idea of their prowess. I also really like their new unit model as well. Just makes them look a lot nicer. Forward comes Isengard. But yeah, that's one thing that I always look at if I'm on the attackers in a siege. If I see that the defenders have gone for a lot of skirmishers, the best thing you can do is go forward with full force immediately. That can backfire, of course, because if you get bottled up and you start getting shot by like rangers or blacklocks or javelins, you can find yourself taking a lot of damage very quickly. But the potential benefit to it is you just smash the defensive line to pieces very, very quickly, and then the defenders have got nowhere left to go. Their skirmishers are going to get run down, and victory will be yours. And I know that the attackers will probably say in this fight we were trying to avoid the positions like here. You know, Rune had all their archers lined up very nicely. On the other sides, on the cliffs, the javelins were there. Against Mordor and Angmar in particular, it was very nasty. But I would also say, if you paid close attention to where those javelins and arrows were going, a lot of them were getting buried into the cliffside. And that's a sign that that's a green light to move in, because it means that you'll still take damage, of course. You'll still take hits. But nowhere near as much damage as you would otherwise take. And there you can see the Narim firing into the back of the Uruk-hai pikemen. Going to be able to get a decent amount of damage done here. Obviously the armour of the Uruk-hai pikemen saving them from being utterly vanquished. But of course no shields, and obviously getting shot in the back is not a great thing for them. Dismounted Serpent Guard. The pikemen should be able to force them into an engagement they will like soon enough. The axe throwers are also over here doing their thing. You can see that Erebor are doing their best here to sort of bring... And again, here in the late game, when Isengard and Erebor moved in, even when the battle was sort of mostly beyond them, they're still able to do a lot of damage to what the defenders have left. Which just goes to show what a real tragedy it is that they didn't maybe do this sooner, because they would have won if they had. Like, I still say that if Erebor and Isengard moved forward at the same time Isengard committed their trolls, the trolls to the White Hand, the attackers would have won this fight, because they would have been able to save what was left of Mordor and Angmar, and then they would have been able to engage in this sort of fighting in the streets. Only they would be the ones with a sort of significant advantage. As it is, the Dragon's Wrath crossbows and the Narim are sort of using their fiery projectiles of doom to do the damage. Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, they're still going to beat these champions of Nafarat, but all the damage they're taking from range is going to be far too much. Defeat is almost a certainty here on the front line. The Serpent's Fangs and the Camel's Chosen fighting side by side. Axe throwers trying to do their thing. Serpent Guard are also over here. Don't know what these Númenórean units are doing. These 2 units of Balagai pikemen should absolutely come down here and lend a hand, because to be honest with you, this fight is getting closer than it had any right to be. A little bit of passivity from Númenor, so I can criticise the defenders as well. Númenor being too passive. Although they've more than made up for that by their use of that Ravenna Curry Brit. They found the gaps brilliantly. going after the Nazkai there. Dragon's Wrath Crossbowman coming down, of course. Strong in melee also. Having a look at the percentage of kills. So it is going to be within 10%. It is actually getting significantly closer at this point. But when you see units like Pharazim Swordmasters on the horizon, like, the attackers may very well win these engagements over here. But the damage that they're going to take doing that is going to be too much. It's going to be insurmountable. And the elites favour the defenders at this point. Serpent's Fangs, Carmel's Chosen, Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen, Pharazim Swordmasters. Also, still getting a lot of damage done with their Nar Rim into the backs of the Dragon Slayers and the Uruk-hai Pikemen. Very nice hits. These Uruk-hai Pikemen, with the assistance of their crossbow brethren, did manage to turn the tide here against the dismounted Serpent Guard. As you would expect, in a vacuum, pikes are very difficult to kill like that because of the Phalanx formation. And there go the Serpent Guard. As you hear the Shadow Guard desperately trying to kill off the Nazkai, while the Nar Rim completely ignore the Nazkai to continue shooting into the backs of those Uruk-hai Pikemen. Yeah. Only 3% of them left, but still a close game. And the attackers being somewhat resurgent here in the late game just, again, I feel as though just backs up what I've been saying all along. If they'd done this sooner, they could have won. They could have won fairly easily as well. And that is the danger of going for a lot of skirmishers as the defenders now, especially in 0.97, where the meta has certainly shifted somewhat to a closer range sort of thing, where, you know, javelins and infantry in particular is more important. If you go skirmisher heavy, it can be very risky to do so. Very, very nice. E-strong crossbowmen, fighting bravely on the front line. They were obviously a real thorn in the side of the dwarves as well, as you would expect crossbows to be, but here come the Númenóreans. And this is going to be the end, really. Looks like the Nazkai are also going to lose as well, just being mobbed by Carmel's Shadow Guard. Also, the Nar Rim were cut down to size very heavily by them though. Axe Throwers, Dragon Slayers, Varid Mithrin. Here come the Númenóreans. Balagai Pikemen moving forward. Those archers are routing, as well as the crossbowmen. The Pharazim Swordmasters are going to come forward, and they're in better condition than the Dragon Slayers, with the support of the pikes as well. It's going to be pretty nasty for the Dragon Slayers here on the front line. The Iron for Axe Throwers may very well try and do some damage, and they will to the Balagai Pikemen in particular, but once again it's going to be a case of too little too late. Nar Rim getting a few shots off, as will the Balagai archers. The Carmel's Chosen, I have to say, have done very well on this frontline engagement, as have the Serpent's Fangs. The two units of the Southrons and the Easterlings doing very well to hold down that central choke point, secure the defenders their victory. Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen getting into position. And Númenor will hold MIRLOND for the foreseeable future. Pharazim Swordmasters, their white armour and cloaks offsetting very vividly against the darker colour scheme of the Balagai units. Look at these dwarves burrowing into this line, in and amongst the pikes and the Swordmasters, but even the Dragon Slayers are becoming shaken in the face of such overwhelming odds. And I don't blame them. Slaying dragons is all well and good, but slaying the Pharazim Swordmasters is quite another matter entirely. The Serpent's Fangs coming forward with their large two-handed Shotels, and they're going to go after the Iron for Axe Throwers. More arrows coming in as well. That should be enough to finish them off, taking a charge from the Serpent's Fangs. The Harad General is there as well, dual wielding his blades. You'd imagine that this is going to be enough to finish them. Horns made of clay. The classic phrase. That's going to be it. So yeah, it's just the Nazkai that are left. Isengard fighting all on their lonesome. The Nazkai will fight to the death at the very least. The Carmel's Chosen have moved over to seal their fate as well, as are the Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen. There's the Runic General as well. He needs to be careful. He doesn't want to end the battlefield. He doesn't want to end the battle in a hole in the ground after being run through by a big Nazkai battle axe. More of an axe than a sword, I think. I don't know, it's kind of a weird weapon that the Berserkers and Nazkai use. It definitely has more in common with an axe in the way that it's used. There's not a great deal of finesse about that thing. But there we go. Very close though, 6%. Not much of the defenders remaining, and it just goes to show that I do feel as though the attackers certainly lost this battle. Like, fair play to the defenders, they set up their lines as they should have, but their compositions were risky. You know, a lot of skirmishers, which could have backfired horribly if the attackers were willing to be a little bit more aggressive. Angmar and Mordor obviously bore the brunt of that because they went into it, and they did well to survive as long as they did, to be brutally honest. Isengard and Erebor were too passive. Like, if they had moved forward at the same time as those trolls, they would have saved Angmar and Mordor, as I said, and it would have given the defenders too much to do. And this is like the learning experience. Like, you can't afford to just be too passive. You need to sort of gather your courage sometimes and move forwards, even though you're going to take losses. Like, there's no way that you're going to come out of these battles with a army in good condition. Let's put it that way. You know, you're never going to be able to conserve your army's strength to the point where you look so good at the game that you manage to survive with like over 70% of your army remaining. It's not going to happen. So you may as well just throw your men forwards and really put pressure on the defenders, which hopefully, you know, in the future they will be able to do that. As for Harad, let's see what did the damage. The Hashari Stalkers, obviously in a siege-like situation, Rangers are going to do very well. The Hashari Shadows did okay. A lot of units breaking 100. A lot of different units as well. Javelins, line infantry, Demons of the Desert, more javelins. The Trollmen breaking 200, one of them, because again, Isengard just filtered in those men to them, and it was easy days for the Trollmen against the kind of units they were up against. Not very many units actually failing to break 100, and those that did, even then, they did okay. Like Beast Tamers getting 90, a Phalanx unit is really just there to hold the line anyway. So yeah, very well played, I think, to the Steward of Dale, and big thank you to him for sending me the battle replay. The defenders certainly deserved the victory, I think, and it's good to see Mirlond as a battle as well, because it's a somewhat unique battle. It's one of those fights where, you know, both sides start off somewhat within the city, and the fight takes place inside the city rather than just on the outer walls like it can with some other siege battles. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I don't know what battle will be next. It may very well be a battle from the RP series between a joint force of Umbar and Linden trying to face down Cardolan. We shall see, because I've been given loads, to be honest with you, so I do need to look through and see which one I'm going to be doing next. I have done a few myself as well, but I don't really think any of them have been sort of sufficiently good to use. But we shall see. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.